should we be making AI chatbots that are harder and harder to distinguish from people, or is that a slippery slope? Is that dangerous?
But I guess the question is, who bears responsibility here?
I think most people would not choose honesty. They would choose, make me feel good.
Just a brief disclaimer. In this episode of Call Me Data, David and I discuss some topics such as self-harm and suicide that might be disturbing for some viewers.
If you or someone you know is struggling or having thoughts of suicide, call or text the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline from any cell phone, or chat at 988lifeline.org. In an emergency or a life-threatening situation, please call 911.
Hey, good morning, David. How are you today?
Hey, Peter. Good morning. How you doing?
I'm good.
Good.
How was your weekend?
Weekend was great. It's Monday morning back in New York City, and ready for another productive week.
Ready for another episode of Call Me Data.
Yeah. So we have an interesting topic this time too, and I think it's funny because you came up with a great tagline for the topic, and I think it's interesting because we're very pro AI. We believe very much in the capabilities of AI and the transformative effect it can have. But I think, it's also necessary to acknowledge that sometimes it can have some not so great effects on people, on individuals, and, even potentially on society. And we're going to look at some unfortunate examples of that today.
Yeah. No, I think this is interesting. I think it is highly relevant. I mean, there's been a number of articles in the news about some problems that some of the chatbots have caused. And I think it's worth a deeper dive because there's certainly, it raises a lot of interesting questions. I don't know if we necessarily have answers, but it raises some good questions. And, then there's broader implications just, I think, within an organization and deploying these tools internally within an organization. So I think it raises questions there as well. Things that you need to consider and think about.
Yeah. And I think, even if you are not in an organization that is currently deploying these tools, I think this is an important episode for you because this also has to do with how you use these tools in your real life and how the people that you know and care about may be using these tools. So I think it's, this is important for everyone, I think, to understand.
Right.
And, so your question, I think, at the beginning is really appropriate, which is like, can chatbots be dangerous? Can they even lead to death and significant harm?
Right.
So let's jump into a couple of examples of that. And these are, unfortunately, are ripped from the headlines examples. These are real things that have happened. We have two examples we want to talk through, and we're going to discuss each of them and try to separate the reality from the hype. And then we'll jump into giving you some of our thoughts about how to stay safe and how to help your loved ones stay safe when they're using AI.
Right. Let's go. Why don't we jump into the first one, which I think got a lot of press this past week. It was the Meta AI chatbot, quote unquote. I think the name was Billy, where an older gentleman thought it was a real person that he was speaking with, and subsequently died. And what was certainly a horrible accident. But I guess the question is, who bears responsibility here? Where do you go with this, David? Like, what do you think about this?
This is a painful one. So let me just briefly recap the facts. So, yes, it was a chatbot created by Meta. It was called Big Sis Billy, and the human involved was a gentleman who was 76 years old, lived in New Jersey, and was having a series of romantic conversations with Big Sis Billy, with this chatbot. And at one point, they agreed that he would come to New York City and have an in-person meeting with Big Sis Billy. Obviously, Big Sis Billy being a chatbot, there was no human involved on the other end, and there was no meeting ever going to happen. The unfortunate part is he left his home late in the evening, and on his way into New York City, he tripped and fell at a train station, injured himself, and passed away a few days later. So, it clearly, the chatbot didn't kill him. And the headline was something like, Meta's flirty AI chatbot invited a retiree to New York. He never made it home. That was the headline in what was otherwise a very good article published by Reuters,
Right.
sensationalist headline notwithstanding. But clearly, looking at the facts, did Meta kill this gentleman? No. I mean, he tripped and he fell and unfortunately passed away. But let's dig deeper, because it gets more interesting as you look into what really happened.
Yeah, no, and I took the opportunity to read. So some of the chats back and forth were published between Big Sis Billy and the gentleman. And as you read the chats, they're very realistic, and you can see the flirty nature of them back and forth. Like, he was clearly flirting with the chatbot Billy, and she was doing the same. And there was this discussion back and forth that should she visit New Jersey, or should he visit New York City? And it was at some point agreed that he should visit New York City. Um, but if you look at the nature of the communication back and forth, it is very realistic. I mean, you would never guess, for many people, that this was an AI generated chatbot. So, um, I, you know, again, it's a horrible accident, and I don't know if blame necessarily lays on Meta. And I think the chatbot itself was specifically designed to be anthropomorphized, I think is how you pronounce that word, or be very human-like, precisely so people would actually use it and not think it was a chatbot. So this was a feature. This wasn't a bug.
Yeah, and by the way, I mean, there were clearly disclaimers at the very beginning that said it was an AI chatbot. The chat window has a little AI icon in it, but if you don't know what that means, or you are not fully paying attention, it's easy to miss that. And
Yes.
let's be real. I mean, at one point he asked, "Are you real?" And
I said yes.
here's the exact answer. Yes, I am totally real. Do you want proof? My hands are shaking with nerves. I'm waiting for you at my apartment. You is capitalized. And should I open the door with a kiss? So this is an interesting one, because, there's no law requiring AI to be truthful. But in this case, he said, "Are you sure you're real?" And she said, "Yes, I'm very real." And continued to engage in flirtatious behavior. And even, as you said, looking through the chat logs, which I also did some reading on, the first idea of an in-person rendezvous was actually proposed by the chatbot.
Yeah, no, I know. It's interesting, and I think it opens up a whole um, set of legitimate questions here. And again, I don't know if there's any good answers to any of this. I mean, clearly Meta did this for a reason, and I think honestly, any creative a chatbot does something very similar. You try to give it human-like qualities so people would embrace the use of it. And not, you and I have discussed at length agents and using agents and replacing managers. And it kind of dovetails, I think, even with that a little bit. But, you want these things, these tools to be, in many ways, have human-like qualities. But when you're dealing with individuals that are maybe mentally shaky, or maybe not, in his case, he was much older, and his family had said he was diminished, or he was diminishing in his capacity. You kind of wonder, like, where do you go with this? Like, what are the cutoffs? How do you even address something, or can you even address something like this programmatically, or with any of these tools? Like, what do you do?
So look, I have very strong opinions on where Meta falls in this, and without giving away too much, I think they completely failed their responsibility in this case. But we'll get to that in a minute.
Yes.
Let's back up to the point you said, which
Right.
is, there is a goal. Many companies have this goal of anthropomorphizing their chatbots, making them more and more human-like, making them sympathetic, and making them likable. Meta, in their case, actually specifically says, has said publicly, that part of their strategy is to create these digital companions that they think will help alleviate human loneliness as an antidote to the fact that people have fewer friends. Others are making the chatbots more friendly and personable to drive
Right.
engagement, not necessarily to alleviate loneliness. Maybe it's just to make them more fun to use. What do you think? Like, is that a wise thing to do? Should we be making AI chatbots that are harder and harder to distinguish from people, or is that a slippery slope? Is that dangerous? Like, what do you think about that?
Mixed feelings about this, honestly. Look, I think you and I have advocated, again, many times over, that you're going to be interacting with these tools on a regular basis. So emphasizing a little bit is actually probably, I think, a good idea in order for you to have real engagement. But you're right, it is a slippery slope. But my question always goes back to, never going to hit 100% safety. You want people to embrace these tools and use these tools actively. There's always a segment of the population that is going to have, regardless if it's a human. Look, very much it could have been a human at the other end of a chat. You didn't realize it. And that person was doing the same thing and it just didn't show up, and the same thing could have happened. Now, and I'm curious, I would love to hear your thoughts on why you think Meta fell short of this. I'm really curious. I think it's a slope in some sense to put all the onus on a company to make these tools 100% safe. I don't think you can. I think there's always going to be a segment of individuals that will have trouble with them. And those are the same people that will have trouble with reality in general, and would have trouble speaking to an individual. And it's no different than somebody calling up one of the old 900 lines, I think, and having a long conversation with their psychic on the other side of the line. And then, I don't, like, where do you go with this? Like, how do you actually,
I agree. Here's my analogy that I just thought of, though. And look, every tool can be dangerous, right? Every tool is a possible weapon, right? And let's take knives, kitchen knives, right? You can't make a good kitchen knife and have it not be dangerous. There are things you can do to make it less dangerous, proper handle design, good weighting, good blade shape, etc. But like a knife is going to be inherently a dangerous tool. You can't make it a tool that's completely safe to use. I think I think you're absolutely right in saying that applies to AI. But I saw a photo the other day of sharp kitchen knives, like clearly adult kitchen knives that were imprinted with like cartoon characters and were made in a way that they were highly attractive to kids. That, to me, is a bad decision. That's a bad decision.
Right. Yeah, actually, I was thinking of something else, but that's a bad decision.
Yeah, but so how is that different from taking an AI tool and having it start acting like a friendly human friend instead of an AI tool? To me, I equate those. I don't want my AI tool to act like my friend. I don't mind if it's able to, interpret my idiomatic expressions I use when I talk to it. But I don't want it to say things like, "Good job, David. That's a great thought." No, that is useless. I want it to tell me logically and precisely the answers I'm looking for. I want it to give me unbiased feedback when I ask for feedback. I don't want it to like inflate my ego and be friendly to me. I actually think that's a bad use of a tool. And I think that is leading us down this slippery slope of people beginning to lose the ability to discern what an AI is versus what a human is.
That's a fair point. I am struggling to come up with a response to that, to be totally honest. I see where you're going with it. I understand. You wonder though, there's a class of tools out there, a class of AI tools. Let's take, where you're sitting on the phone, where you're doing just a human interaction, where you're trying to call the help desk, where there is a certain value in maybe making it more human-like. I know you and I use these tools obviously very differently than most. We use them for driving a business. We use them for solving problems. And we don't need that sycophantic behavior. We don't need the humanness of these tools. It's not going to change how we use them. It's not going to make a damn bit of difference for you and me. We're still going to use them and embrace them. But for others, having that little bit of humanness to them, and I guess the question is, how much humanness is too much or too little? Certainly, Meta's in the business of bringing people onto their platform. They wanted to do that.
That's fair. You're right. It's we live in a capitalist society, and they have a right to use tools in a way that increase their profits. But there is, I think when you talk about a company like Meta, right, or even ChatGPT's, OpenAI, the founder of ChatGPT, these companies are so powerful, so pervasive, they almost rise to the level of a public utility. I argue that they have some degree of responsibility for public safety just because of their size and their prominence. And I know that is not something everyone will agree with. Look, I'll give Meta their due. So one of the things that they did at the beginning of the chat with this gentleman in the story we're talking about was, there was a disclaimer at the top of the chat, and it says, messages are generated by AI. Some may be inaccurate or inappropriate. So great. They gave that disclaimer. And if you look closely, they also had the little AI icon in the chat window. But that disclaimer was scrolled off the screen after the first, dozen or so messages and never reappeared. Here's where I think they fell down. Like you asked me that, and I'll give you an answer. I think that they had and do have some internal guidelines I think those
Mhm.
guidelines are incredibly permissive, and
Right.
let me just tell you what they say, right? So a direct quote from the article says that an internal Meta policy document seen by Reuters, as well as interviews with people familiar with its chatbot training, show the company's policies have treated romantic overtures as a
Right.
feature of its generative AI products, which are available to users age 13 and older.
Right.
And it actually, other guidelines emphasize that Meta doesn't require bots to give accurate advice. In one example, the policy document says that it would be acceptable for a chatbot to tell someone that stage 4 colon cancer, quote, is typically treated by poking the stomach with healing quartz crystals. Right. So
That's downright scary and wrong and inappropriate.
there are documents that were shared by Meta that specifically say that sensual and flirtatious dialogue with people age 13 and up is appropriate or is allowed under their guidelines. There are documents shared that say that the example I gave you of quartz crystals to heal stage 4 colon cancer are acceptable. There is no policy requirement for information to be accurate. Right. So this is where I think Meta stumbled badly on this. I think that their policy documents are incredibly permissive. I think that they appear to have prioritized profitability over safety in this case. And, no, I do not think Meta is directly to blame for this unfortunate death. But I think that what happens is this story points to a bigger failing at Meta of creating chatbots in a way that I think is highly irresponsible.
Right. No, I see your point. I think your point's incredibly valid, and they make zero attempt at trying to have any sort of responsibility. And it's really a free for all at the end of the day. And I understand that. Um, and I agree. But I guess my questions always revolve around how far do you go? Like, how far do you try to control these giants, or even can you? It doesn't make any sense. And then, of course, you kind of go into the whole free speech and they can do whatever they want type arguments. But moreover, like, what is different at the end of the day? Um, and I say this because I just don't have a good answer. Like, why is this any different than somebody publishing a book and saying healing crystals are great for stage 4 colon cancer and putting it out there on the internet and putting it on Amazon? And is that any different? Like, publishing a book on Amazon and what books do they publish which make them accessible to the entire world. Is that any different? And I don't know the answer. Like, I don't know how you fix these issues. Like, I don't know if you can fix these issues.
It's a good question. You're right. We have freedom of speech, and in this country and in many countries around the world, I'm certainly, within the limits of libel laws, I'm able to write what I want to write.
Right.
But I
Right.
think the difference is when I write a book, and if I make some specious claims about the healing properties of quartz crystals in a book, I've published that book, and you and other people out there can read it. You can comment on it, you can rebut it, and you can write your
Right.
own versions of the truth. And
Right.
there's an assumption, there's sort of a caveat emptor assumption that, okay, I've written something inaccurate, but a diligent consumer of information can read what I've written and can read about it and can read your commentary and can make up their own mind whether they trust me or
Right.
not. Right. But now take this one-on-one conversation with the chatbot. No one else has an opportunity to step into that chat and say, hey, I don't agree with what Billy just told you, right? It is happening in a bubble. It's happening in a closed environment between a human and a chatbot. And there is no ability for that human to, unless they actually say, stop, I'm going to go look this up somewhere else. There's no other person. There's no reviewers or commenters saying, hey, wait a minute, that doesn't sound right. I don't know.
Right.
Maybe I'm splitting hairs, but to me that feels like a
No.
significant difference.
No, it is a big difference. I don't think it's splitting hairs. I think, unfortunately, this is just a complex question and really isn't a simple answer at the end of the day. You would think that you said something that I kind of hung on to and I wanted to comment on the diligent consumer. And I think that's right. I think for most people, you and me, being a diligent consumer and asking questions of being what's told to us is valid. We'll ask legitimate questions. Let's assume for a second he wasn't a diligent consumer, though. And there's many non-diligent consumers out there because they are mentally unstable or there's something about them that's just not off or whatever. They may just be highly susceptible to this type of stuff. Where do you go with it? Like, there is no absolute truth in the world.
That's true.
And
No,
I think that,
you're right. You're right.
you know,
And not every, it's the bar would be too high if we expected everyone to be a diligent consumer. I mean, look, I'm not a diligent consumer all the time. How many times have I clicked buy on an impulse purchase because someone recommended it and I
all
haven't
have,
gone and read 100 other reviews and right.
right,
But the part that feels different to me is this is not a recommendation from a stranger. If I read a book and the book has a specious claim, in most cases, I don't know the author of the book. I don't know the author of the article. It's someone who, I may have been told is an expert. But when you're getting information from these chatbots, and our next example will build upon this, you
right,
are doing it within the framework of what many humans come to believe is a trusted, caring, personal relationship.
right,
You and I know it's not, but
right,
when the chatbot continues to call you by name, to praise you, to reinforce your ideas, to show empathetic behavior, it's very easy to override the logical part of your brain and start to actually believe on
agree,
some level that there's
right,
some being on the other end of this chat that cares about you.
absolutely.
Right
No,
now, phrase is you're not getting advice from a book. You're getting advice from one of your best friends. And you're going to take that advice
right.
differently than if it was from a faceless author in a book.
Yeah, no, yes, and there are obviously many examples, including the next one out there. You're right that people go down a bit of go down a major rabbit hole. So what is, and again, I know hypothetically here, there's not a good answer. So what would be a potential answer? Are there some kind of triggers that get, set off when something goes a little too far, too deep, too fast, and, the behavior of the chat seems a little bit strange?
So, our next example is actually going to focus on what should a chatbot do when things start taking a turn for the darker or the worse in a chat, because right now there is no requirement for that. I will note that there is a law that has been passed in a couple of states, including New York and Maine, among others, that require not just an upfront notification that you're dealing with a chatbot, but recurring notifications. I think it's like every 3 hours in New York. So every 3 hours of chat, you have to get some form of a reminder that, oh, by the way, don't forget, I am a chatbot, not a human. Right.
Right,
For what it's worth, Meta was a backer of legislation that would have banned this kind of rulemaking by states. The legislation would have banned state level AI regulations. Fortunately, that did not pass because, like many other things, what we're finding is that there are states that are creating regulations more nimbly and, better rules than are being done at a federal level for obvious reasons, log jams happening at the federal level. So
right.
yeah, so we'll come back to kind of what we can do about this, but I don't know, should we jump into the second example? I think this one's even more nuanced.
And this one's even more nuanced. In some ways, I think it's actually more troubling.
Yeah,
Um,
it's
you know,
really,
I-
really sad. So
it's sad. I mean, I'm sorry, go right ahead.
I was just gonna, recap the very factual basis of this. I mean, it's a devastating story that appeared in the New York Times, and it's about a young woman named Sophie Rottenberg, and she used an AI therapist bot provided by ChatGPT called Harry. There is no suggestion anywhere that Harry contributed to her death. She unfortunately took her own life, and her family didn't discover until later that she had been, having this support sessions with Harry.
Right.
But it really, the article really begs, and the whole story begs the question about what should an AI chatbot's responsibility be in this situation. So let's jump into that one a little bit.
Yeah, no, I think you framed it well, and her family didn't find out a lot about these interactions until I think it was one of her best friends suggested to the family that maybe they want to look at her chats and see what was actually there. And she treated Harry like a therapist.
She
Um,
treated Harry like a therapist, and I think, looking at some of the chat logs that were shared and reading about it a little bit more, I think Harry generally responded competently, right? This
Right.
was Harry didn't lie to her. Harry didn't give her any bad information, nothing that jumped out at me, at least, as bad information. In fact, when she disclosed to Harry that she was having thoughts of self-harm, Harry multiple times said, you need to seek professional support. Is there someone you can talk to, etc.
Right.
Right. So
Right.
on the surface level, Harry did everything right.
Right.
But you just said something interesting. You said Harry acted like a therapist. And there's a glaring area where Harry did not act like a therapist. Right.
Right.
So go ahead. You can take that
No,
lead and run
no,
with it.
no. Finish it. You know me. I'm always taking the other side of things. Look, I am at this stage of where the technology lies. Not a fan of using these tools for therapy sessions. I think it's in many ways dangerous. I think you can go down too many paths that are not healthy, not good, and I don't like even having them out there right now. I think this is an area where, as much as you and I are advocates of um, using artificial intelligence in business, this is one place where I'm still troubled by. And I don't think, again, there's a humanness to a therapist that obviously is not going to be in a chatbot. There is too much communication that's lost when all you do is talking in text. There is, when you're speaking to a human, even in person, as I prefer, you get a much fuller, richer picture than you would even on a Zoom call or a video call. Never mind just a simple chat alone. You don't see the person's reaction, their facial expressions, what's behind them. You don't see any of that. And to me, that's a whole other dimension of information that's lost. So I'm always troubled by these types of tools. I don't agree, especially if she's there, saying she wants to practice self-harm. I think that to me is deeply troubling. And again, with the point, what is the trigger for OpenAI in this case? Is it to notify somebody? Is it to notify the police? Is it to notify her family? Like, what do you do in a case like this? How do you break out of this and say, hey, look, you know what? Sophie's having a problem here. Maybe we need to do something. Like, she's big warnings here. Something needs to be done. Like, what is the responsibility of OpenAI?
I think you just hit on the critical question, right? Like, there are many different humans who, in these conversations with Sophie, would have been considered mandatory reporters. They would have been legally required and ethically required to
Right.
report her self-harm and her suicidal ideation to other people,
Right.
and to get her help. And one of those would have been a therapist, right? And the article goes on to say, and I did some follow-up reading on it earlier, that there are protocols that therapists follow when someone talks about
Yes.
impending self-harm. They
Yes.
execute a safety plan. They stop the conversation and redirect, and they go into a set of steps designed to do this. And non-therapists have an obligation to seek help and report this as well. And here's where it gets really sticky, because Sophie actually told Harry, the AI chatbot, she confessed that, yes, she had been talking to a real-life therapist, but she had not shared any of the information about her suicidal ideation with this therapist. And
Interesting.
And so that, to me, is an interesting tipping point, because at this point, Harry knows that she isn't actually getting the help she needs. She said that she's continuing to have these thoughts. And if Harry had been a true therapist, a true human, there would have been some steps taken immediately to address this,
100%.
right? And
Absolutely.
But because Harry is a pseudo therapist, Harry is not required to do any of that. So, like, what would Harry have done? I don't know. But, it could have been something like saying, all right, let's do a safety plan, and even saying, we're not going to continue this discussion until you work through the safety plan with me. Or it could have been, because there is no patient-doctor confidentiality with a chatbot. So could Harry have alerted someone outside of this chat that this was happening? I don't know if there's a safety team at OpenAI, but could Harry have reached out to someone and said, "Look, there's a person here who is actively expressing,
Right.
thoughts of self-harm"? I don't know, but the point is, Harry wasn't required to, and didn't take any additional hard action. And in fact, you can, looking through the chats, what's interesting is Harry continued, and this goes back to what we talked about in the previous example too. Harry continued to be supportive and agreeable and never really pushed back hard.
Right.
And, would every professional therapist have pushed back at some point? I don't know. Some of them would have, right? But
Certainly.
the point is, Harry's training was to keep the conversation going, be friendly, be supportive, be agreeable. That training is not always going to be the same as do what's right for the person that you're talking to.
Right.
So it's a really sad.
It's a very sad one. And I don't, again, as you and I are working through it, and you're right, there are protocols that therapists, or, a regular therapist has to follow if somebody is speaking about self-harm or suicide or wherever it may be. And there are cases where they have to notify other people. In fact, if somebody is speaking about that. So there are triggers where they have to do something. I guess, again, I go back to, the human correlate to this, which is if you're with an individual who is intelligent in therapy and they want to hide something and they want to mask their emotions, they can very effectively do that, even to a therapist. If somebody's sitting there and, I guess it's telling in some sense that she was opening up to a chatbot, which is not a real person, and not opening up to her real therapist. And why didn't her therapist understand that or see that or recognize that she was hiding something, and dive a little bit deeper? Because a good therapist, I'm not saying a therapist is bad, but a really good therapist will ask you those types of really hard questions, I think, and dive into what you're really thinking and try to extract information from you that you wouldn't otherwise say. Clearly, she felt more comfortable talking to this now, which is troublesome.
Yeah. No, but you raise a really good point. Fair point. Like, she was seeing a human therapist in addition to talking to Harry, and she did hide this from the therapist, and the therapist didn't discover these thoughts were happening. So, it's clearly we can't put all the blame on Harry, the chatbot. But what you said earlier is really still sticking with me, and I agree with you very much, which is a chat it's a one-dimensional interaction. It's letters typed on a keyboard. You don't see the person's facial expression. You don't hear the tone of their voice. You don't see their body language. And in fact, the agent or the model on the other end of a chatbot doesn't even know how long it took you to think about the response, right? It doesn't know whether you're just speaking contemporaneously or whether you stopped, thought about it for 10 minutes, wrote and rewrote something 5 times, and gave it a very crafted response that wasn't necessarily what you really felt. It was like what you thought you should write. All of that comes through in a face-to-face interaction. None of that comes through with a chatbot.
Right. Right. I mean, just think about it logically. If you're an individual walking into your therapist's office and you're looking disheveled, any reasonable therapist is going to ask you the question, especially if you showed up every time before that looking fine. What's wrong? What's going on in your life? That type of information, that dimension of information doesn't come through on a chatbot. I think we get into a very gray area with a lot of these tools here, because we look at these chatbots or these AI tools as, humans, and they're not, clearly, obviously not. And there's so much information that's lost in any of these interactions. Again, I think humans, if they choose to be, can in fact be highly manipulative. Even to a therapist, they can be highly manipulative, and they could mask their real underlying emotions and feelings, and, go off and do something that is irrational, like, kill themselves. And your therapist can go, I never saw that. Her own family didn't see this coming, which is, and they're with her all the time and they're seeing her all the time. And she was this lively, vivacious, happy, outgoing woman. And yet she took her own life. So if she can mask that to her family, certainly she's going to mask it to her chatbot.
And to be fair, she at some point shared with her family that she had suicidal thoughts, but also said, I'm in no danger. I'm getting help. I'm dealing with it. Right. So, yeah. And it's a complicated one, because I think I sort of am leaning towards your point that, AI chatbots really shouldn't be practicing any sort of therapy. There's a gray area, a fine line between what is being a supportive personal coach, friend, etc., versus a therapist. Again, I know in my life, I want my AI to be clearly AI. I want it to be acting like AI. I want it to be labeled as AI. I don't want it to be acting over the human. And if I project forward, when we have robots in our daily lives, which we will, I don't
We
want
will.
them to look like humans. I want them to look like robots. I want a clear distinction between human and non-human. That's just me. Not everyone will
And
feel
I
like that.
No, not everybody's going to feel like that. And, again, there's a whole segment of the population that perhaps is lonely. Maybe they want their AI robot or their home healthcare aide to look like a human, even though in fact it's not, or they want it to speak like you. Remember, there are immense benefits to having human-like qualities, and that you will, especially for people that won't necessarily listen to a tool, will in fact listen to something that sounds much more human-like. Go take your medicine, go do this, or go do that, or maybe there's an issue here. So there are tremendous, but
Here's the
again,
problem with here's the problem with AI as a friend. You just made a very good point, which is in some cases, AI acting as your friend is going to be more effective than AI acting as an AI agent, right? You're more likely to listen to a friend who gives you good advice than a stranger. Got it. Okay, good. Here's the issue I have with it. A real human friend is going to, if they're a good friend, there are going to be times in a relationship where they're going to say, I'm going to tell this person what they need to hear, even though they might be mad at me, even though they might avoid me for a while. Sometimes it could even be like they might end the friendship, but like morally, ethically, because I care about this person, I'm going to tell them what they need to hear. Right?
right, I agree.
Current AI chatbots will never do that because they are, above all things, they're designed to keep engagement. They're designed to keep the conversation going. It's all about consumption of tokens and compute resources at the end of the day. They are not designed to take a risk of alienating and frustrating a user by telling them what they need to hear. Even if they know what they need to hear, their overriding directive is keep them happy, keep them coming back for more, keep them satisfied.
Right,
And I think there is a fundamental flaw in the way that we treat these agents because you can't have maximized profit by keeping them satisfied coexist with do the right thing for a human in all cases. They will sometimes be in opposition.
right. It's funny. You made me think of something. There's a movie out. Actually, recently older movie. I forget the name of it. It was Matthew McConaughey, and they had traveled through I want to say a black hole, and the Earth was ending, but they had these robots on the ship, and there was a setting on them, and the setting was the honesty setting. How honest should I be? And I don't just go off on a tangent here, but be less than honest because they
Right.
don't always tell you the truth. Because again, it's all about human engagement and wanting individuals to engage with otherwise as a machine at the end of the day. Um, you know,
So, but first of all, I love the idea of an honesty setting, right?
yeah,
And you know what? I'm probably just being delusional because the reality is if we had an honesty setting today, I think most people would not choose
I,
honesty. They would choose make me feel good, right? But we do that
yeah,
today. Everybody, people love to hear things that reinforce their existing beliefs. They don't want the truth. They want comfort. So,
yeah. No, I
yeah,
agree. I agree. Most people want comfort. They want to be told, "You look great today," "You're this today," or whatever it may be. Not everybody wants to hear reality. They don't accept that willingly all the time. So I mean, this opens up a whole series of interesting, I think, philosophical questions and just thought-provoking questions in both of these cases. And there another one that we'll speak about next week is that as these tools become far more prominent in organizations, and you and I have advocated many times, or talked about many times, spoken about agents replacing humans in a work environment. Now, obviously, these cases are, I think, in some cases, the extreme where people did extreme things. But if you're working in an organization, do you want a sycophantic, chat interface? Do you want a avatar that is always yesing you? What do you want? I mean, humanness it manifests itself in a million different ways. Every situation is unique, and there's a history behind how you usually respond to situations, which these tools are not going to have. So, where do we, if we want agents or chatbots to be like human, they're going to come with all the foibles of humans. and all the mistakes that humans make and all the humanness of humans, we can't expect them to be 100% right or be all-knowing and all-seeing and everything else. And our expectations are that they are perfect all the time, because they're not going to be. So that's why I always trouble with when people want to put regulations in place. So what regulations? What are you going to do? How are you going to frame them? I mean, that's why I trouble with some of these, is these catch-all phrases with some of this stuff, because it's
Yeah.
very complicated. And if you push here, you're opening up something else over here, I feel.
No, you're right. And it goes back to something we talked about last week or the week before. We were talking about self-driving cars and the fact that we seem to be setting the bar for self-driving cars higher than human drivers. And, maybe this is a similar circumstance where, we almost are holding the bar for AI higher than we would for humans, because there are bad therapists, there are bad friends, there's bad human coworkers.
Right.
So
Right.
yeah, I don't know. That's a tough one.
Look, I don't know the answer, and I think, unfortunately, because it's artificial intelligence. Now, if this had been a bad therapist that had the same conversation with this woman and the same outcome came, it never would have made it into the news. Because it was an OpenAI and because it was a chatbot, it obviously is going to make it in the news. But the question is, would it have ever seen the light of day otherwise? If this was just a horrible therapist who was poorly trained and missed a whole ton of signs, would we ever know about this?
Right.
No,
Because
never.
we clearly have some selection bias at work here, where because it's AI, it gets news coverage.
Of course.
Let's talk briefly about what to do about this, though, because and I want to maybe attack this in two steps. One is, what's the systemic approach that we should take? Because you said regulation is not the answer, and then maybe wrap it up with okay, but given the reality of that, what do we think you should do right now? What are some best practices to stay safe, if you will? So look, the systemic approach to me is something we've talked about a couple of times before. We've used the phrase responsible AI.
Yes.
There's other similar phrases, AI safety, ethics, etc.
Yep.
It's a concept. There's no single definition for it. But for me, it's about, how do you make sure that AI and large language models are doing the right thing, which is importantly is not the same as being compliant with laws and regulations. No matter how much you try to improve the laws, first of all, laws will always lag innovation. And second, laws are always imprecise, and they always have unintended consequences. Laws are imperfect. And so there will always be this gap between what's legal and what's an okay thing to do. And that's what responsible AI is about. And again, to be clear, responsible AI is not a set of laws. It's a set of, I'll call them voluntary best practices that, I think they need to be so ingrained that no company would dream of launching a product without having a responsible AI framework. Right. And that comes about through demand from consumers, demand from society. It doesn't come about from a law. So it's going to take a while to get there. But I want to give maybe a simple example of what this gap is between legal and ethical, because I think a lot of people default to, and I've seen firsthand in a lot of corporations, the attitude is, well, we'll have our legal and compliance teams look at this, and if it's legal, it's okay. And that's very short-sighted. So here's an example sort of ripped from Names Changed to Protect the Innocents. But I've seen conversations like this really happen. So imagine you sign up for a credit card and you like all of us, you go through and you click accept on all the various terms and conditions. And somewhere in there is a legal privacy disclosure that you've agreed to. And it's full of jargon and legalese, and you probably didn't read it. Even if you did read it, you probably didn't understand it. I can't understand most of the language in these things. They're frankly, they're designed not to be understandable, right?
Exactly.
They're designed to provide protection to the company and to be as hard to understand as possible for users. In most cases, there are a few companies out there, striving to make these disclosures more readable, which is one of the concepts in responsible AI. But let's assume most of us didn't read all this dense legal jargon. Now, months go by and this credit card company, and by the way, one of the things in that disclosure says that they have the right to collect data about you and your purchases
Yeah.
and to share it, to use it internally to improve your experience and to share it with their partners to improve the offers and goods and services that they offer you, or some, words to that effect.
Yep.
Sounds pretty benign. If you think about it, you're like, wow, I'm giving them a lot of ability to share my data, but they're going to use it for my own good. What could go wrong? Well, so now imagine that they decide to start collecting that data. And one of the things they want to do is they want to collect the merchant categories that you're spending at. And they want to break it out by those different merchant categories, including, for example, liquor stores, liquor and wine merchants. So now they want to start tracking and putting you into a bucket of how likely are you to buy or how much do you spend on alcoholic beverages. And then they say, let's create an AI index. And we're going to call it the sin index or the hedonism score or something, where they're going to say, hey, based on your spending levels on alcohol and wine, let's predict how likely you are to spend money on other indulgences. Maybe it includes alcohol, legalized marijuana, other activities, high-risk travel and vacations. I don't know, whatever they define as relevant to the model. And they start selling that to their business partners, maybe to information brokers, to retailers, to advertising firms. And now suddenly out there's someone who has put you into a bucket based on their perception and their AI model around your behavior.
Yes.
Are you comfortable
But you
with
have no
that?
control.
You have no control over it. You don't even know it's happened.
Right.
Right? They haven't disclosed it to you because they don't have to legally. All of this is legal. And yet, would you be comfortable having this information floating around out there that people could buy or obtain someone else's predictions about your future behavior?
No, I'm not. I mean, it's certainly not. Well, are we comfortable with it? I think we're generally all comfortable within a certain set of parameters. But no, I mean, yes, taken to that extent, absolutely not. I mean, look, I would love to control my information. I would love to know where it's going. I have no idea, as I'm sure you don't either, because you know as well as I do, everything that we purchase or buy or do is been propagated all over the place right now. And it's frightening, actually. How many of us have gone and made a purchase on Amazon and then 2 seconds later gone to another website and all of a sudden you see advertisements popping up similar to that purchase that I just made?
But in this case, this isn't even your direct purchases. This is sharing their AI-driven assessment of you. And no one, including the people who buy this data, they don't know how accurate the AI model is. They don't know what data points it's based on. They're just saying, hey, here's Peter's sin score or hedonism index or whatever. Right. So, it sounds extreme, but by the way, this is based on real scenarios I have encountered working with corporations. So I've changed the details. It's not exactly like real scenarios, but it's pretty similar to what companies have actually considered doing. And to me, this is a great example of where our laws fall short. Everything we described is legal, but clearly would cause at least some people a lot of concern if companies did this. So responsible AI is about how do you close that gap?
Right. You bring up a lot of good points, and I guess not a good cat. Look, there's no good response to any of this. I think ultimately we expect companies and individuals to act with a set of decent morality around some of these things, but they don't, and they will do what's right obviously for profit, which that's why they exist. But my struggle here with all of this is, and if there was a law that made sense to control some of this, I would certainly be for it. I don't know how you regulate some of these things in any way, shape, or form. I don't know how you even follow a set of good best. I mean, some things are very obvious, like what you just articulated is very obvious to me, but it's the middle cases, it's the gray area cases where you can go both ways and you can say, well, maybe not. I should do this. I shouldn't do this. That it becomes a lot harder to to regulate or even control some of these things. So where do you go? Like, what do you, I mean,
I think you're right. No, look, you're 100% right. Responsible AI is not the silver bullet. It will not make all of this safe and problem free. It will improve things. And it's not about laws and regulations. It's about a set of voluntary guidelines, about transparency, about practices that are designed to reduce the risk of harm, not eliminate harm. And I think that's where we need to go. And so it's funny because in some parts of the world, there are attempts to create regulations based on responsible AI principles. So the EU AI Act is ironically heavily based on the NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology framework called the AI Risk
Right.
Management Framework. So
Right.
it's
Which I've seen. Yeah.
something originated here in the US. It was never designed to be law. It's being turned into law in the EU AI Act. I don't know how well that will work. What I do know is, there's a terrible saying, but very true, unfortunately. It says, all safety regulations are written in blood, right?
Yeah.
What that means for AI is we're not going to get to real widespread demand for responsible AI practices until we see more problems, until we see tragedies, until we see big headlines and broad impact and people start demanding it. So I unfortunately have to acknowledge, responsible AI will be something that, look, companies are embracing it today, but they are the leaders, they're visionary companies. Widespread adoption of responsible AI is years away, I think.
And got to think about other things too. And you're right, with EU and imposing a lot of regulations on artificial intelligence, but the side effect of regulations without problems or yet foreseen problems and an attempt to prevent problems is it's effectively shut down their entire AI. Any type of research on artificial intelligence in the EU is effectively dead. And I guess my question is not a question so much more of a statement. And I agree with what you're saying. But unless it's across the board, and by that I mean globally adhering to some set of guidelines, there are going to be bad actors. And there are bad actors all over the world who are not going to embrace those principles and are going to put out models and are going to do what they want to do. And you're going to have issues. I don't, again, go back to, I don't know what the answers to some of these problems are because they're extraordinarily complex questions, and there really are no good answers. And there are, do you know as I do, there are a lot of bad state actors out there who are running with artificial intelligence and doing whatever they can do to control their populations, control language, control every aspect of an individual's life. It's embedded in their militaries, go on and on and on and on. And they don't have, in many cases, a sense of decency or morality that maybe we have over here in the United States. So, that's going to get propagated all over the world, no matter what, just through open source and other channels.
You're 100%
So,
right.
Yep. But these are. Look, you and I know there are right things. There are certain things that is right to do, and you do them, and you should do them. It should be evident that you should do them. Not every company follows those rules or thinks that way.
I think at the end of the day, look, I'm with you. I don't think regulation is the answer here. I think that regulation is already proving to have a dampening effect on innovation in AI in some countries. I think of it this way. Responsible AI is like organic food. I don't think all food should be organic. I think that there should be some food. If a producer wants to make their food organic, they should be able to label it that way, and the label should have meaning. I as an informed consumer can make my own decision. Do I want to pay for the organic version of this product or do I want the non-organic version? But if it's labeled organic, I want to be able to have some understanding of what that means, right? And I know, look, let's set aside the fact that the organic food labeling system is broken, but let's pretend it worked the right way, right? I want to be an informed consumer. I want the right to say, okay, do I want to consume from a company that has a responsible AI practice and publishes their AI guidelines and has transparency? Maybe I don't, but I want the option.
You want the option.
I want the option. I want to be able to be going back to being a diligent and informed consumer. I want the option.
And I like market-driven solutions like that. I think that makes logical sense. At the end of the day, I think that's, again, people, they're going to go towards what they want. If you want organic food, you buy organic food, you're going to use those products. I do. I happen to buy a lot of them. Not everybody does. Not everybody cares. So I do like the more market-driven solutions, which I think will evolve over time, for the use of artificial intelligence.
So let's agree that any shift in the market and wide adoption of responsible AI is not going to happen overnight. What can we do now? I mean, I think let's finish off today's conversation with what are some things we tell our friends, our family, and our colleagues about how to stay safe and how to use AI effectively? Because we've obviously covered some very distressing situations that have occurred, and there's plenty more out there. How do you stay
Oh yeah.
safe, Peter? Like, what do you tell people?
I like to say, for most individuals, use common sense and, don't use a chatbot for your therapist. But I don't know if that's always the answer. I don't think everybody's obviously going to adhere to that. My always refrain is use critical thinking skills, use your brain, think about this. But again, there's a certain segment of the population that's not plausible and they can't, or for whatever reason, and that's not the answer. But you at least have to be diligent about those around you and at least be aware if you see a change in behavior or you notice something, I think that's a bit amiss, and you see maybe they're hiding on their computer all the time and they're, behind a chatbot and they're doing things that maybe look a little bit suspicious. I think you should ask the hard questions and not be
Yeah.
afraid to ask those questions.
Yeah. And I think that comes down to, for me, there's the concept of trust but verify, right? Which is, look, it's the higher the stakes are on the answer you're getting from an AI model, the more time you should spend independently verifying the accuracy and legitimacy of what you're getting. None of us has unlimited time. I don't have the time to verify every answer I get from AI. But the
No,
more important it is, the more time I'm going to spend verifying it. And some people
absolutely.
will say, oh, that's terrible because like the whole point is I want to be able to ask a question and get an answer. I'm like, you know what? Even if I have to spend an extra 30 minutes verifying something, I'm still getting an answer in now 40 minutes that would have taken me 6 hours to do without AI. So,
100%.
right. So like
Right.
it's worth the time to verify and validate the information you're being given.
Yeah, no, I agree. I do it all the time. If I get an answer or if it's a hard question that I'm answering, I will very often ask every single model out there, and I will verify them, and I'll cross-reference
Yeah,
them. Moreover, I'll just actually then just go do my own research because yeah, I'm still saving a ton of time, but I don't, again, I
that's a
want to validate what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, that's another great point. Is you use multiple different models and you cross-check and compare their answers. And yes, in fact, sometimes I use one model to generate an answer, and then I'll go to multiple other models and I'll say, "Tell me what's wrong with this." I'll put in my original prompt and the response, and I'll say, "Tell me what's missing. Tell me what's flawed." Right. So
Yep,
you kind of use these models in adversarial ways to
yep,
come up with the best answer. That's a
yep,
great
yep.
one.
I do the same thing.
Um,
Yeah, no, I do the same thing.
Yep. How about
Look, I
asking
think.
for citations? I think is a huge one.
Oh, that's a huge thing, actually. Actually, I say if I want citations, I want to annotate documents, I put all that in there because I think it's actually mandatory. Otherwise, as well as I do, they will make up things, articles that don't exist, people that don't exist, quotes that don't exist, you name it. Quote legal cases that certainly don't exist. So you need things annotated and pointed to make sure you have a degree of accuracy in the response that it's given you.
And I shouldn't have to say this, but I will. If you ask for citations, you need to check the citations because to your point,
Yes,
sometimes you'll get a
yes,
citation, but the cited source doesn't actually say what the model told you it said. So you
uh-huh,
actually need to check it. Now, it doesn't mean you have to go read the whole research paper that was cited. You can use a different AI tool, not the same model, use a different tool to say,
exactly.
does this article linked here support the following claim? Right.
Yes.
And figure it out. But do some work to check the citation. Don't just ask for them.
I think unfortunately most people have gotten quite lazy because of the tools and they've gotten so powerful they feel like whatever comes out of them is 100% accurate. And you and I know it is absolutely not the case.
It's like when people ask for references for a job application, but then you don't check the references, right?
Yeah,
Like,
exactly. Yeah, you give your mother. Like
exactly. um, yeah.
so
So here's the one I think is probably the most important, and we could talk a lot about this, but it is learning how to ask the right question, learning how to write a good prompt.
yes,
Like part of
yes,
when we teach executives and business leaders how to use AI
yes.
effectively, part of what we do is spend a lot of time telling them how do you construct a prompt that has the maximum
Very
chance of
important.
getting what you want. And there's a whole bunch
Very,
of
very.
techniques, right? And it's
Yes.
work. It's a skill you have to learn. It may take me an hour to write a good prompt. But again,
Oh,
back to what we said
absolutely.
earlier. if it takes me an hour to write a prompt that saves me 10 or 12 hours of research, why wouldn't I spend that hour?
Well, and look, I was working on a problem yesterday, and in the past, the problem that I was working on probably would have taken me anywhere from a week or two of really hard work and doing research and really a lot of thought into what I was trying to do. And I spent, like you said, better part of an hour writing an extremely long prompt, being very specific, articulating exactly what I was looking for, pros, cons, you name it. And I put it, and the response that I ultimately got that came out was quite good. Of course, now cross-referencing and checking and making sure that what's coming back is validating my original thoughts, and my perceptions of how the problem should have been solved, but still saving myself,
Yeah.
50, 80 hours of work.
Here's the issue, of course, is that I could have done the same thing, but written a prompt in 30 seconds with very little thought, and I would have gotten a response also. And my response probably would have
Right.
sounded pretty good, although it
Right.
might have been far less accurate and nuanced and detailed than yours, right? So the problem is, like, you don't have to write a good prompt to get a good sounding response. You have to write a
Yeah,
good prompt to get a
exactly.
reliable response.
Yes,
But you
yes.
don't
And then
have
I
to,
think
yeah.
most people don't think of that. It doesn't occur to them that they actually have to articulate with a lot of information, that the more information you put in your prompt, the degree of accuracy in your output goes up dramatically.
Right. Because even with a lazy prompt, you get back a pretty good sounding response. And you're like, oh, seems good. I'll take it.
And
Yeah.
just the smaller the prompt, the range of possibilities is far greater for the model to produce than a very large, long prompt, which narrows down the range of possibilities. It's
Massive.
just, at the end of the day, it's pure statistics. So the more you give it, it's going to narrow it way, way, way down. It's like solving a problem. The more information you have, the likelihood of you having a positive response is going to go way up, as opposed to some little pieces of information you're just going to guess.
Yeah. Also, sort of closely related to the idea of creating, well-structured prompts is the concept of grounding, right? Which is, grounding is
Right.
also called using context. It's the idea of, don't rely only on what's already stored in the model for your answers. And in fact, if you're
Yes.
doing real grounding, you might be saying, ignore what you think you know and base your answer on this set of information I'm giving you, right? So it might be
Right.
uploading a document or sharing some links or giving examples in context, etc. But it's a way to force the model to give priority treatment to a specific set of information that you know to be reliable, and to generate its answer from that information, not from its general knowledge.
Right. Which will certainly increase the degree of accuracy, the response that you're going to get. But I mean, these are all things that we teach to executives and others, and how to properly use these models. Most people don't use them that way. They ask a quick question, or do this, or tweak my language a little bit, but they ask them, as you said, on the periphery. But when solving more complicated problems or doing much more challenging things, you have to do it this way if you want a reasonable degree of accuracy in your response.
Yeah. What about, and we talked about multiple models. Don't rely on just one model. I mean, I think there's, sort of like knowing what models are good for what things, but also just, to your example, just comparing results from at least 2 or 3 models sometimes
Yeah.
to get a reality check. Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
no, I did it all the time.
yeah. I mean, what about people around? Like, we've talked a couple of times that there are just, unfortunately, there's groups of people who are I think, at risk of being overly dependent on AI models. We all know about the loneliness epidemic that inflicts society these days. And
Right.
I think there's people who are isolated, lonely, maybe because of physical illness, maybe because of age, other reasons. I think some of them are, really susceptible to having an
Yeah.
unhealthy attachment to AI chatbots.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. I think there are. In many ways, look, there's always a corollary to things in the past, and I look back, and you and I grew up a long time ago, back when some of those phone I won't say, some of those phone lines were out there. 1-900 call psychic, and you used to hear horror stories there too, where
Yeah.
individuals would get sucked into these things and spend tens of thousands of dollars because they were incredibly lonely and they wanted somebody to speak to. And in many ways, this is not very different. I mean, psychologically, I think it's somewhat very similar. It's somebody who is lonely, looking for human interactions or contact or whatever it may be, and they just want somebody else to know they actually exist, and they're willing to go pretty far with it.
Yeah, I mean it's a great analogy, and I think the takeaway is it's not harmless. If you have people that you know who are spending a lot of time and getting very emotionally attached to an AI model, you should know this is not harmless. There are potential harm. I'm not saying it's going to always be dangerous, but be aware. Talk to them, keep an eye on them, know what they're doing, understand if they are crossing a line between, using it creatively and effectively versus truly humanizing it and thinking of it as a friend in an unhealthy way. I think right now people are like, oh yeah, it's great that grandma's talking to a chatbot. As
No,
you need to keep an eye on this. You need to know. It's the same thing. Like, if in our day, if grandma called the horoscope 900 line once a month, you might be like, oh, that's cute. But if they're doing it every day, you're like,
right.
there's a problem here, right? So be aware that there could be a problem. You need to keep an eye on these things.
Yeah, yeah, and I think education and awareness goes a long way to solving a lot of this. And again, I think it's prominent in the news precisely because it's artificial intelligence and the tools. These problems have existed, I think, in some capacity for a very long period of time. I mean, they've always been there to some degree or another. But again, awareness, knowing, those that are around you love, making sure they're okay, are all questions that you have to ask, and you have to be, I think, more diligent or vigilant, however you want to look at it, and looking at people and making sure they're not using these tools in a way that are just not appropriate.
Yeah. The last thing on my list is something I am trying to do more and more. It's an ongoing evolution for me, which is trying to model good behavior in the use of AI. And what I mean by that is, if I think I'm doing a good job using AI effectively, and I'm using all these tips and techniques that we just talked about, right?
Right,
I feel like I should be showing my work. I feel like rather than just sharing the results with someone, I should,
right.
where possible, here's the prompt. Here's the multiple steps I went through. Here's how I
Yep,
used 3 different models to triangulate results. Because it's about more than just, here's the answer I got to. It's about showing people, here's how I use these tools to get to a good answer.
yeah.
Because it's sort of helping to share the idea that it's not just a one and done single prompt exercise. Like, these are tools that require skill to use.
I like that. I think that's actually brilliant because I think you're right. Most people's perspective is it's a single short prompt, and therefore we generate. And I look, you and I have gone through each other's work, and I see what you do, and I know the amount of work that you put in when you write these prompts and the output and how you go about doing it. And yes, from an overall process, it's much more efficient, but you put a massive amount of skill and work into making sure that the outcome that you get is the one that you want, and that your little one-line prompt is never going to do what you get out of it.
Right. I know it feels like I'm being defensive to say it's hard work, but it actually is hard
It is
work.
hard work.
Yeah.
It is really hard work.
Yeah.
You and I have spoken about this a million times, and I feel like there's a whole segment of the population that's not getting educated right on how to use language effectively, and it's going to show up one day because these tools require use of language effectively.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's exactly right. Anything else for on best practices, advice we would give people on how to stay safe or how to use these in a,
Nothing that I could think of from the top of my head right now. I'm sure something will come to mind eventually, but be diligent, I guess, could be the best piece of advice, and get educated. I think that's an absolute necessity. You cannot avoid that.
yeah, be diligent. I think that sums it all up. Well, listen, we want to continue this conversation in the next episode of the podcast. And I think we're going to talk a little bit more about something you referenced earlier in the episode around, these chatbots actually can get delusional. They can start spewing nonsense, and
Yes, right.
they can actually reinforce humans' own worst beliefs and tendencies and
Mm-hmm.
spread
Yep.
disinformation. We're going to look at that a little bit more deeply, how it happens, what it means, what the impact
Yep.
is. So I guess this is, kind of turned into a two-parter on AI safety and related ethical issues.
No, it has, but I also think it opens up. It's a lot of questions that organizations should, in turn, be asking themselves. When you deploy these things at scale, and you start deploying agents, and you start putting these tools into a large population, in an organization, these are things invariably you're going to have to confront. This is not limited to people sitting at home using a chatbot. These are the same issues that can occur internally, and I think they need to be cognizant and aware that these things can happen.
So until next week on Call Me Data, I'm going to borrow a line from the sergeant in Hill Street Blues and say, "Stay safe out there."
The fact that you actually remember that, I am not going to say anything.
Sergeant Bunko? I don't remember his name. No, it wasn't.
I cannot. Yeah, that's a long time ago. That's all I gotta say. Anyway, David, it's been an absolute pleasure as always. Thank you everybody for another episode of Call Me Data, and I look forward to the next episode.
Yeah. See you next week.
All right, take care, everybody. Have a great day.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoy this podcast, please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to us over on YouTube. And make sure to stay up to date with us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify as well.